Good evening. I'm Ron Thiemann, Bussey Professor of Theology at Harvard and Director of Harvard's Business Across Religious Traditions program, a program made possible by the generosity of Bruce McEver, who holds both a Harvard MBA and a Harvard Divinity School MTS. We're now in our 6th year of programming, and we sponsor educational initiatives designed to assist leaders to understand the place of religion in global societies, those societies in which we all live and work today. We believe that greater religious literacy and interreligious understanding helps leaders to deepen the ethical insights that are so crucial to effective leadership in contemporary business organizations. While most of our programs have been held here at the Harvard Club in New York, we've also presented programs in Boston, San Francisco, and London. In 2010, we launched a new programming initiative, the CEO Lecture on Faith, Ethics, and Leadership. Our inaugural lecturer was Stephen Green, former CEO and group chairman of HSBC, and since January 2011, the new Minister of State for Trade and Investment in the United Kingdom. This evening, we welcome our second distinguished lecturer in this new series, Bill George, former chairman and CEO of Medtronic and currently professor of management practice at Harvard Business School. Bill George is one of the most influential business persons in the world today. He has sketched his understanding of the relation between ethics and management practice in his many books, which include Finding Your True North, A Personal Guide, 7 Lessons for Leading in Crisis, and Authentic Leadership, all themes that you'll be hearing this evening as well. He often appears on national radio and television news programs, and his columns are published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and Fortune. He has been named one of the top 25 business leaders of the last 25 years by PBS, Executive of the Year 2001 by the Academy of Management, and Director of the Year 2001-2 by the National Association of Corporate Directors. A graduate of Georgia Tech with an MBA from Harvard and honorary degrees from Georgia Tech and Bryant University, Bill also plays a key role in corporate governance through his board memberships with ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, Novartis, and Target Corporation. He's also a trustee for many not-for-profit organizations, including the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace, the World Economic Forum USA, and the Guthrie Theater, among others. But what is probably less well known about Bill George, but that you are going to hear this evening, is that he is a lay theologian of some note. He looked back in horror when I suggested that, but I'll be the judge. It's when Bruce McEver and I sat down with Bill in a meeting in his HBS office, we engaged in what I consider one of the most engaging, stimulating theological discussions I have had in quite a long time. And Bill shared in that meeting some of his intriguing thoughts about biblical interpretation, theology, and the challenges of Christian discipleship. So often we separate the worlds of faith and business. Tonight you're going to hear how one person seeks to integrate them in his own life and in his own management style. So it is no surprise that we have invited Bill to be our choice for this year's lecture. So please join me in welcoming him. His address is on the topic, The Role of Your Faith in Global Capitalism. Does it have a place? Bill George.
Thank you, Ron. That's the first time I've ever been called a lay theologian. So thank you so much for the kind introduction. And Ron reached out to me about 15 years ago, coming to see me at Medtronic to talk about some of the work that he was doing at Harvard Divinity School when he was the dean there. And Bruce McEver and I actually go back to the 1960s when we met at Georgia Tech in the mid-1960s. And so Bruce, I really appreciate, I don't know where Bruce is, but he's there in the back. Thank you for supporting and funding this idea. As Ron said, the title of my talk is The Role of Your Faith in Global Capitalism. So let me point out very quickly that we're talking about I'd like this to be a personal talk. I will share my first faith journey, and I hope in so doing I'll challenge you to think about your own and where it fits in today's secular-dominated world. It is not just an intellectual talk, but I'd like to discuss some fairly personal things and how they fit into that. The subtitle I've labeled is Work is Love Made Visible. It actually comes from Ronald F, which I read in 1958, because I think there is clearly a relationship between faith and work. And it's hard to do one without the other. It's hard to separate the two. And so I'll be talking about that. But I'd like to start out by talking about the crisis in global capitalism, because I see it fundamentally, having been on the, if you will, not quite on the playing field, but certainly on the bench, if you will, or in the first row during the whole financial crisis. I see it, at its core, I think we now have a crisis of the spirit. And I think that is what is affecting our country right now. And I think that's causing great divisions in the country. The Occupy Wall Street movement, I look at as not just a reflection on Wall Street and all the anger at bankers, but really as a reflection on our society. I look at the people engaged in these movements all around the country and frankly all around the world as holding up a mirror to us and saying, do you like what you see in society? Do you like the inequalities? Do you like the growing divisions? And I for one, will say absolutely I don't like them. But we're talking past each other, and we're a long way from getting to solutions. So tonight, I'd like to challenge some of your core existential beliefs and what is the role of work in our lives. I just came back from Davos on Sunday, and it was a very interesting meeting. We're talking about the transformation yet to come and new models of doing things, particularly in business. But the meeting was certainly highlighted again, which you've read other places, the loss of trust in our leaders. It opened up with Richard Edelman of the public relations firm presenting data on the deep loss of trust. That followed the Harvard Divinity School annual report, which showed that confidence in our leaders has reached all-time lows. And I think that when we lose trust, it's very hard to get it back. And it creates great collisions and differences in society. And so I think we need to really think hard about these things and how we're going to heal our society. Because if we're all, in many ways, rapidly growing into two societies or even three. And this cannot be a healthy thing for a country that has always been unified around a central purpose and was able to welcome immigrants and people of very diverse background. So why is this a crisis of the spirit? I think this has deep roots. This is not something new. This did not occur since the collapse of the financial community in 2008. Actually, I see the roots going back to Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, all the way to 1970, who wrote a very famous paper, many of you have read, The Purpose of Business is Business, and emphasized the importance of measurement in terms of shareholder value. He didn't use short-term, but certainly it has morphed into that in terms of the measurements used by Wall Street. And Friedman spoke in that paper that he said bluntly, any business leader who is concerned about the environment, about diversity in the workplace, or about philanthropy is a pure, unadulterated socialist. Those are his words, not mine. I've always considered myself a fervent capitalist, but I guess this makes me a socialist, because I think any business leader who doesn't take those things into consideration today will not be able to sustain his or her success. And so it came on in the 1980s. We had the advent of the Raiders with Michael Milken and junk bonds, which I cynically refer to as the shareholder of the last 5 minutes. And I think then we have, in the 90s, we were on a very positive course, but there were underpinnings of the decay setting in even at that time, certainly in terms of saving rates and similar things like that when you're doing so well financially. I was a beneficiary of that at Medtronic. We had the wind at our back. Certainly today, CEOs have the wind in their face, and it's very difficult. But we also came up with some theories which were largely flawed. The principal agency theory, which one of my colleagues, Michael Jensen at Harvard, who's a giant of an academic intellect, interestingly enough, put this forth and had a lot of supporters. And then later, about 4 years ago, recanted his theories and has been working in what he calls ontological leadership, which is very close to what I call authentic leadership. And so I think we've had some others. I think this unleashed the whole notion, the agency theory that CEOs are agents of the principal, that if you want to get them to do what the shareholder wanted, you must pay them very well. And that starting at about 97, we saw this huge escalation in CEO pay. And once that genie gets out of the bottle, it's very hard to get back in right now. And so I actually would come back to the Sermon on the Mount, in which Jesus is reported to say, you cannot serve God and money. And I think we have lost sight of that, and we've chosen the instant gratification that money brings without really addressing these issues. A good friend of mine out in Colorado Springs, who's an evangelical Christian, says he works a lot with wealthy people who come to him and say, I've got everything I ever dreamt of in material terms. I've got multiple houses, cars, part ownership in an airplane, and I feel this hollowness within. I'm 48 years old. I've been successful in everything I've done. Is that all there is? And he said, if you're just chasing money, yes, that's all there is. Once you max out on the material side, you'll find that there is still that sense of hollowness. I think in the 21st century, I refer to the last 10 years, the first 10 years of this century as leadership's lost decade. Now, within that, I think oftentimes we need to get in trouble, like we did with the dot-coms, particularly with the Enron era, and several 200 companies that made very, very large adjustments, often in the billions, to their accounting records. This was not an accounting matter, it was a leadership failure. To the housing bust that culminated in the 2008 collapse of the worldwide financial markets. And now what we're seeing in the aftermath of that is an unraveling of society, primarily here, but also in Europe, for many of the same reasons. And we have tens of millions of people that are angry, and underlying that anger is a sense of despair and often hopelessness. And this is a very unhealthy thing for society and not easily corrected. But my conclusion is that a spiritual crisis such as we're experiencing now, which I think that's what it is at its core, cannot be solved strictly by economics. Economics are important, but we cannot solve it. I think it can only be solved by taking a hard look at what is our purpose in life and why are we doing what we're doing? How is each of us going to make a difference in the world? And that gets back to whatever your faith, if you're atheist or an agnostic, regardless of that, how do you integrate your sense of purpose, which I am referring to here as your faith, with your work? How do they become one and the same so that your vocation becomes your calling? I think what happened during this crisis, it's really separated faith from work. And this has led to this hollowness, sense of hollowness within. But I think we need to go back to the basic existential question. Why are we here? What's our purpose on this earth? It's something every one of us searches for, regardless of our religion or if we have no religion. Each of us is searching, longing for that question. And people have certainly answered that question for themselves, but I think there's probably more searching now than there has ever been. As I see it, too often now we've separated ourselves at the neck and separated into our minds, separated from our bodies and our spirit. And we are one being, and I think the key to a wholesome, fulfilling life is the capacity to integrate the mind, the body, and the spirit into one being and into all your actions. I'm not a believer in proselytizing about religion because I think we learn so much from each other, and the differences between us often enrich our own. Even the Dalai Lama says this, that he said, I'm not trying to get you to be a Buddhist. I want you to be a better Jew, a better Muslim, a better Christian, a better Hindu. And my goal is not to convert you to Buddhism, but I want you to be deeper in your faith. And it's through the dialogue, being encouraged by a program such as this one, Business Across Religious Tradition, that can really do that. So I think it's the example of our lives that really counts. It's not what we say, it's the actions. And today, there's enough cynicism out there that people are only watching our actions. The words don't mean much unless they're backed up by actions. But all too often, I think we decompartmentalize our life. I realize that's not a dictionary word, but it's one that has great meaning for me because we don't integrate ourselves in terms of our work life, our personal lives, our family lives, and our community lives. I recall going to a retreat called Cursillo. It comes out of Spanish tradition, Mexican tradition, actually out of the Roman Catholic Church. And I actually went to an Episcopal Cursillo. It was a 3-day course. But at that time, I realized how I was trying to be different people at work, in my young family, in my personal life, and in our community where I was being asked to do things and dealing with people 25 years older than I was a lot. But I think the core of that is I realized that I wasn't really integrating these things to the point where I was working for Litton Industries at the time that I didn't even dare tell my boss where I was. My boss is in California, I'm in Minnesota. I didn't even dare tell him where I was. I took one day off, vacation day, and a Saturday and a Sunday, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I didn't even dare tell him where I was. I just told my assistant, just tell him, here's a number where you can reach me. And, because I wasn't really willing to integrate all these things in my life. And I think at that point, I decided that had to change. My wife went through a couple weeks later a similar experience, and we decided we needed to change our lives around to bring all these things into into one being. So I'd like to challenge each of you to think about on your faith journey, your journey through life. Where are you in that journey today? What are the points that you're looking at? What's the most meaningful things in your life that are affecting you? And in doing so, I want to share with you my journey, because I think we're all spiritual pilgrims, if you will, on a journey. And it's in understanding our own journeys that we connect with other people. We don't connect through the head. We connect through the heart and through the spirit. My journey goes all the way back when I was 5 years old, and somehow as a little boy, I convinced my parents to change churches. Don't ask me why. But I remember a few years later, and I'm not even sure when this occurred, being really affected by the phrase from the Gospel of Matthew, let your light so shine before people they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And that was a very meaningful thing to me, and it kind of gave me a centering purpose for my life ever since. That our role is to do the work, not to talk about it, but to make a difference and to let others see that so that we impact each other by what we're doing. My father wanted me to make up for his failures and lead a corporation, a large corporation. He even named the corporations when I was as young as 8, that he could suggest that I could be head of a company like Coca-Cola. Or if that didn't work out, there was a company in Cincinnati called Procter & Gamble I should consider, which I'd never heard of. Or there was a little computer company out on the East Coast called IBM. Well, of course, I had no idea what he was talking about, but it did put an idea in the back of my mind. Somehow I'm supposed to be a leader. So I go into high school, junior high, high school, and lo and behold, I've joined a lot of organizations, never asked to lead anything, never elected a student council. I'm a good tennis player, not even elected captain of my tennis team my senior year. So finally I decide, going into my senior year, that I'm going to run for president of senior class. Against one other individual, I saw myself as much better qualified than he was, and when the votes came in, I lost by a margin of 2-1. So it's pretty clear the kids in my class didn't appreciate what a great leader I was. So I went off to Georgia Tech. Part of the reason I went to Georgia Tech, it's a great institution, but part of the reason was to escape myself and get a fresh start. But as my friend John Kabat-Zinn writes, wherever you go, there you are. You can change venues, but you're still the same person. And you're going to have the same issues. And I hadn't quite discovered that at age 18. But I remember being confronted late in my freshman year by a group of seniors at Georgia Tech, took me aside, and I'd been trying to get involved in things, trying to hold leadership roles, running for office. Actually, I ran, if you count my sophomore year, I ran for office 6 more times at Georgia Tech. And the outcome was, as you might guessed already, I lost all 6. So now I'm 0 for 7. So I'm pretty depressed. I'm a real loser. And they took me aside and said, Bill, no one's ever going to want to work with you, much less follow you, because you're so self-interested. It's all about you, and you're moving so fast, no one can keep up with you. You need to slow down and really take a deep interest in other people. And that was like a blow to the solar plexus for me, because I realized what a lot of my weaknesses were, but it was also extremely helpful. And I went on a search for myself, really through my faith, through prayer, and through friendship, trying to explore who I was and what I was. And I'm fortunate enough to come through that period and be selected to hold many leadership positions at Georgia Tech and at Harvard Business School. In fact, one of the ones I had at Harvard Business School was more or less appointed, but we had something called the Musser Seminars, funded by a man from St. Paul named John Musser, that brought together students from the Harvard Divinity School, the Episcopal Theological Seminary, and the Harvard Business School to have seminars. And I remember one of the people who came, we brought in, was Robert Greenleaf, who was head of organizational development for AT&T. And Greenleaf presented his ideas that he was just putting out in a book on servant leadership. And I was really taken with this, that our calling is to serve, and we serve through our leadership, that the purpose of our leadership is really to serve. And I think the principles that Greenleaf laid out then are equally valid today, all these years later, because this was the mid-'60s, so we're talking about 45 years ago. But then I came out of Harvard, I came to Washington, D.C., worked in the government for 3 years, and I was on top of the world. And I got a call about 4 months after I got out of HBS in the fall of '66. And my father was calling to say my mother died that morning of a heart attack. And I was never close to my father, but I was extremely close to my mother. I'm an only child of older parents, very close to my mother. And I was devastated by her loss and spent a lot of time thinking about my life with her. And I was 24 years old. And I came out of that over the next several months, and I fell in love, got engaged, we married, and we're now in the summer of 1968, which was quite a tumultuous year. That was the year that Martin Luther King was assassinated in Washington, and not in Washington, but there was the People's Park in Washington that came out of his assassination. Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, who was killed as well in Los Angeles. And I was engaged to be married, and I was back on top of the world. My fiance had gone to Georgia to be with her family, where she came from, to get prepared for the wedding. And 3 weeks to the day before our wedding, I got a second call, and from her parents telling me she had died that morning of a malignant brain tumor, and totally undiagnosed. She'd had some headaches, that's true, but it was totally undiagnosed. She had a glioblastoma, which of course is incurable. We now know that. And of course that was only revealed on autopsy. But it was devastating to me because, and I didn't know where to turn. The two people I had been closest to were all of a sudden disappeared from the earth. And you know what? In my mother's case, even though she was only 61, I could explain this in terms of the natural order of things. Parents die before. But I couldn't explain a 25-year-old who was doing great work, working in the Appalachia Region Commission, who had great potential, and of course with whom I was in love, disappearing. You know, it just didn't compute. And as I prayed about it, thought about it in depth, you know, I realized that, you know, as St. Paul said, now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face, that there are things in life that we can't understand. And I think I had a gradual acceptance of the fact there are just some things in life we don't understand. And to this day, I could not give you any explanation for that. It's one of those things. The third experience in that time frame was in a month later, I was invited to a dinner party by close friends, and there was an empty seat at the table, and there was a woman named Penny Pilgrim there. I took her home that night because she'd taken a taxi to get there, and she's now been my wife for 42 years. So I wasn't quite prepared for that at the time, but sometimes things happen in life, and it's oftentimes one door closes and another door opens. And so I cannot explain all these events to you, but just say that it's been a wonderful experience with Penny. And we've had great times together and raised 2 sons and now have 4 grandchildren and 2 daughters-in-law. So we're very, very happy together. Well, I still had this idea in mind. I'm going to become CEO of some big company. And so I joined Honeywell in 1978, became president of Honeywell Europe, and got a 2-step promotion, what I now call the worst promotion of my life, brought back to Minneapolis to be a sector head. I had 9 divisions, 3 groups, and a whole peck of problems. And finally got this business turned around after about 3 or 4 years. And lo and behold, I was asked to take on by Honeywell another set of turnaround, another set of problems, and another turnaround before we had fully completed the first one. And got that handled a little bit shorter order. And then in 1967, late 67, I was asked to take on the 3rd set of turnarounds, 1987. It was a business that I didn't really resonate with, the aerospace and defense business, even though I'd worked in the Department of Defense. That wasn't where I wanted to spend my life. But I was still charging to be head of Honeywell, become CEO, and chasing a lot of numbers and trying to work our way through these problems. 8 of the 9 divisions I had were out of town, out of Minneapolis, where my home was, young children. And one day I'm driving to my home in October of 1988, and we have a nice little lake. It was a beautiful fall day. By this time, we have 2 boys in high school. Penny's got a good job as a psychologist. We have tons of friends in Minneapolis because we've come back from Europe 4 years before. And I look at myself in the mirror. I see a miserable person. I was telling myself how well I was doing and where I was going, and we would get through these problems, and we'd get there. And when I finally confronted in that flash of the mirror was that, in fact, I was losing it. I'd lost sight of the person who I thought was going to be a value-centered leader, and I was chasing the brass ring of becoming CEO, and I was playing the game, even to the point of wearing cufflinks, which I don't wear, nothing wrong with cufflinks, but trying to dress just right, impress the board of directors, impress top management, play the game. And I was doing that. And I really was losing sight of why I was there at all. And I sat down, went home, talked to my wife, Penny, about this. And Penny says to me, "Bill, I've been trying to tell you this for a year. You just refuse to listen." See, we all have blind spots. And oftentimes it's the person closest to us that can see through our blind spots and help us see ourselves as we are. And I feel very fortunate I've had that experience. I've also had, coming out of the Curcio experience, formed a men's group of 7 other guys that meets every Wednesday morning to this day from 7:15 to 8:30. So we've been meeting ever since 1974. So that's a long time, some 37 years. 1975, but 36 years we've been meeting. And it's a wonderful group of people. They met this morning. I just wasn't in Minneapolis. I was here for a board meeting. So I went to my men's group the next day, and they said, "Yes, we've noticed these changes in you, and it seems like you're really you're not really there right now like you used to be, not really real." And then they raised the issue, "You turned down Medtronic twice. Why did you do it?" And reflecting on that question, I had to admit that it wasn't that giant company that I thought of leading, and it was then in those days a mid-sized company. So actually they encouraged me to call the founder back, and the then CEO, Win Wallen, and Earl Bakken, the founder. And I remember talking to the founder down in a little motel down in Scottsdale, because the only time I could get together with him. He never even interviewed me. He just talked about, if you will, the mission of Medtronic. And he spoke so passionately. You know, I said, "This is where I should have been all along. This is the place, the mission, the values that I've been searching for all these years. I'm a slow learner. Take me 20 years to find that place. Where did I devote my energy? Where can I find that deep sense of passion?" Because I think in any kind of work, We need to have a passion for the work, or we will not be the most effective. No matter how capable you are, you may have all the strengths, all the capabilities, but if you don't have passion for the work, which I didn't have at Honeywell, to be very honest, for the business, but Medtronic has a mission of restoring people to full life and health. And I remember walking in the door of Medtronic several months later in April of 1989, and I really felt like I was coming home, which is a funny thought because I'd never been there before. Coming home to a place I'd never been before. But you know, it's that place. I'm sure you think about your own lives. If you had this kind of experience where all of a sudden you're with people where you really felt at home, you felt like you could be yourself, you felt like you could learn a lot from them, and together you could take on really tough problems and really make a difference in the world. And I think in the 13 years I was at Medtronic, it was like a godsend because we had the opportunity to, yes, the market cap went up many, many times, many-fold, about 40 times, or 50, but that's not what's important. What's important is that when I went there, we were treating and restoring. The mission of Medtronic is to restore people to full life and health. We're restoring 300,000 people to full life and health, and today that number is 10 million. And of course, it's broadened way beyond pacemakers and the more narrow range of products we had into many, many other fields. But to me, when I meet someone whose son has type 1 diabetes and whose life's been restored, or whose life's been extended with Parkinson's disease or cerebral palsy or these terrible diseases, or my assistant, my office manager, Diane Weinhold, called me this morning to say last night her father has a Medtronic defibrillator, and the defibrillator went off when he was going to the opera, and she spent the night at the hospital. And as I said to her, I said, Diane, had it not been for that defibrillator, it would not have been a very ugly story. So, you know, you feel like you really are making a difference in the lives of people, and through all the people, not through anything I did, but it was a real godsend and a great opportunity. Now, how do we make that real at Medtronic? Because I think it's so important in any organization, whether you have an organization of one person, 10 people, 10,000 people, or 100,000 people, that there's a real sense of purpose and mission. Without that sense, people are not going to give you everything they have. They'll give you their brains, but they won't give you their hearts. They won't give you their souls. They won't put that passion behind it that has them go the extra mile of making sure every product comes out as perfect. Because if it isn't, as one employee who's making heart valves told me, someone's going to die. They don't have that passion for their work to make that innovation, to drive to get there, to overcome the obstacles, or to drive 100 miles at night to get a doctor a product for the next morning so that doctor can do surgery at 6:30 the next morning. What is it that gives people that passion? Well, at Medtronic, we talked about the mission all the time. In fact, we actually gave everyone a medallion that showed the rising person coming off the operating table and walking away to full life, because we felt our job was not to implant a product in someone's body, but to restore them to full life and health. So still they were fully restored. You know, maybe 5 years, 10 years later, in mind, body, and spirit, we felt like our job had not really been done. And so we had individual meetings with employees. Our founder used to do this, and I took it over. Now my successors have taken it over, to meet with every employee and share the mission of the company and the values, and really talk about the history and how essential this is to the company. And many people said as Medtronic grows, the old timers, you know, at the time I joined, we had 4,700 employees. Today there's 40,000. You know, the newcomers won't get this. Actually, we've done employee surveys that show in many ways the newcomers are more passionate about it than the old timers because they've had a chance to see how it works elsewhere. But that became a very important thing. The other thing that became very significant at Medtronic was the holiday party. It used to be called the Christmas party, and I realized that, you know, Medtronic, when I came there, it felt like the Lutheran Church of Fridley, Minnesota. Kind of white bread, you know what I mean? And I felt like as we became a very diverse company, a very global company, and brought more people of much more diverse backgrounds into our ranks, we had to move into a different direction. We actually, at the holiday, and this is an event that's held, it's not a party at all, actually have 6 patients come in, their doctors introduce them, they can't talk more than a minute, then the patients tell their story of how a Medtronic product impacted their lives in the last year. And it's a very moving thing. It takes place in mid-December. And it used to be opened by one of the employees reading the Gospel of Luke. And so we decided that was a long-held tradition, like 40 years, 50 years now 60 years, that had been going on, and that's not something we could kill. So what we did is we converted it so that into a video, if you will, that brought in, if you will, short vignettes from each of the religious faiths, and including Kwanzaa and Native American, which are not religious faiths, but to bring that sense of bringing us all together to unify us around this essential purpose of restoring people to full life and health. And I'll never forget my first one of these events. I went to, the founder told me, keep an eye on the young boy that was there, who was 18 years old. 5 people got up and told their stories. One man was in his mid-50s and actually broke into tears. He described, he said, I had chronic pain for 10 years, never could get rid of the pain, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He said, I became alcoholic, drug addicted, anything to kill the pain. And then he remembered getting a Medtronic spinal device that relieved his pain through a neurological cessation of eliminating this feeling of pain. And that's when the tears came. And then the 6th person came up, and I'll never forget, it was named T.J. Flack from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And T.J. was the same age as my son Jeff, but there the similarities end, because T.J. was born with cerebral palsy. And as he told his story, that he had surgery every year from birth until he was 16. And finally at 16, he denied further surgery. And any of you know anything about that terrible disease called cerebral palsy, his body became ever stiff, more rigid, his movements more spastic, his communications, he could hardly speak. He certainly couldn't speak in terms that you could understand easily. And TJ talked about how he had gone to a wheelchair, and he said, and of course his life was going nowhere. And then he smiled, and he patted his belly, and he said, and then I got your pump. He said, this is my friendly ally. It changed my life. And he went through to describe how he was back in a mainstream school. He could walk 3 flights of stairs a day. He had arm braces. He was not healed. He still had cerebral palsy. But that his life was, if you will, restored. Not to perfection, but so he was going to college, he has a girlfriend. I actually had him come back in my retirement event 13 years later, and he's told what had happened to him the last 13 years. And it's a very positive story, even though he still has the disease. And I remember having tears in my eyes and being a little embarrassed. And I looked over at the guy next to me, he had tears in his eyes too, so I said, it must be okay here. But that's when I really got it. Why were we there? What were we doing? And that sense of mission, of passion, to be carried on, which I've seen happen in a company like Target with 350,000 employees. I mean, this can happen anywhere. It's not just about a healthcare company. But that really became the essence of what we tried to do at Medtronic. And I remember a final experience I'll share with you. In 1996, the company was rolling. We were doing extremely well. And I'd gone to Israel on a business trip, and I came through Zurich, and on my way home, called my wife Penny to see how she's doing, and she was in tears. And she said, I had a bad appointment with the doctor today, and they wanted to do 1 mammogram routine, then they did another one, then they did another one. And she said, I'm sure it's breast cancer. And so the next day we went in for a biopsy, and sure enough, it was breast cancer. And she went through the traditional treatment of, if you will, of surgery or mastectomy, chemotherapy, hormonal therapy. But I remember writing an email that Thanksgiving. She'd had it's now been, by the way, praise the Lord, 16 years. Since she got this in 1996, February, and she's doing very well. But in fact, it's totally transformed her life. I could talk about that separately, but it's transformed her life and her work. But I remember at Thanksgiving, the night before Thanksgiving, even though 40% of Medtronic employees are outside the United States, don't practice Thanksgiving, I sent out an email of gratitude to all the employees, because Medtronic operates like a family. And I'd been sending out regular emails about how the business is doing. Things are going great. Revenues are up 18% last quarter. Earnings up 22%. Stock price all-time high. No response. No one ever responded to these. I got back, when I talked about this expression of gratitude, hundreds of emails back from people, even some written in Dutch, which I couldn't read, talking about their experiences. And all that did is open my connection in a different level at this, if you will, visceral level. They're sharing with me their stories. Let me tell you about my son, let me tell you about my husband, let me tell you the challenges I face. And it became that kind of connection. And so that was a great learning experience for me because it really deepened the connection. Even though I'd been CEO at that time 5 years and was out with employees a lot, this really made it much more real. So I'd like to, and then I put a 10-year limit on time as Medtronic. And I went on a wilderness journey to Switzerland to learn how to teach, all alone. As I tell people, I went from having 25,000 people in the organization for which I was responsible to a third of one. So I had a third of a secretary, and I had to do, and it was a whole, where am I going now? And I realized in that time that the purpose I originally had in my leadership had been largely fulfilled, but that I realized we were going through this leadership crisis, and I had this passion to try to help develop better generations of leaders than my generation had been, because I realized many of my generation had failed and had dragged down others in the system. And so that's what the mission I've been on. I've been at Harvard. Dean Kim Clark asked me to come to the school in 2004. I'm in my 9th year, and this is what I teach. I'm like a broken record, trying to help leaders all the way from CEOs to young MBAs. I'm now focusing entirely on mid-career executives, teaching leadership, but really trying to have a new era of leadership in which it's all based upon purpose and the sense of being authentic and having genuine connections which cut across all other kinds of lines that bring us together. So I'd ask you now, where are you in your journey? Each of you is on a journey. I think as like pilgrims on a journey, we intersect, but we're not just on parallel journeys, we're on intersecting journeys, but each of us has our own journey. In fact, when we did the work for True North, we found the most important thing was your life story. So where are you in your journey through life? And what are the big questions you have now? Because I'd like to get into a discussion about those. Before I close, I'd like to talk about how do we restore faith in global capitalism? Because we have lost that. How do we bring that back? Because without faith and trust in one another and in the system, certainly capitalism cannot operate. I think the big news out of Davos, the World Economic Forum this year, is that Michael Porter's article a year ago, Creating Shared Value, is having great resonance. I talked to literally 5+ CEOs about how they saw this. And there's a huge movement among corporate CEOs now to say, okay, I know I have to make the numbers short term, but if I focus on that, ultimately, I'm going to destroy this enterprise. That it's got about something, we've got to really get back to the central core purpose of what we are and bring people together, not around processes, not around rules and regulations, not around hierarchies, but around leading by values. And we need to unite people across ethnic lines, geographic lines, business lines around the central premise of the values of this organization. Sam Palmisano of IBM's being a big pioneer in this area and had enormous success. He went to Leading by Values back in 2003 after a values jam, and it's had, you can check the record of IBM, and you'll see that kind of success. So how do we get everyone together to think about this and to realize what is the purpose of business? And I think business and capitalism has a vital role in our society. We're creating value for everyone. If we don't create value for our customers, I'll guarantee you there will be no shareholder value in the long term. If you don't believe me, check the record of General Motors. They proved that. They had a brand name that kept them alive for 50 years, but they'd lost sight of what that real purpose was. And what is it that motivates employees? It's not getting the stock price up, maybe a few at the top. It's not just money, as the economist told us. What gets employees in passion is the central mission of the organization. Whether you're a stock boy at Whole Foods Market trying to produce healthy foods, or whether you're working for General Mills and creating healthy foods in your labs, this becomes essential. And I think capitalism has a very essential role. And I think the financial community, in which I serve on a board, has a key. The financial community should be thought of as like the fuel in the tank. Without fuel, the automobile won't run. The machines won't run. And that is really the role of the financial. So financial community has a very vital role, not just to make money for itself, but to provide that fuel in the tank. And frankly, today, a lot of people can't get money. They need to start brand new companies with great ideas. We need to be funding them. But I think in economic terms, I think we're, as a nation, we're split between one group of people that says, let's just go on like we are, don't worry about inequality, that's the way it is, that's probably a good thing. And another group of people that say, let's redistribute an ever-shrinking pie. And I think the answer to that is neither. We've got to build a sustainable economy through providing sound jobs for people, giving them the skills, and building great global enterprises. And there's nowhere better than the United States in terms of entrepreneurship, creating companies, and so many of our great job creators of the last decade have also come out of startup companies like mine was 50 years ago. So, but I think we need to restore the sense of pride in work, that work is not just a menial task, but something pride. My son lives in Germany, and I've looked at the German model, and it's a very, very successful model. And people there, many of them never go to university, and they learn a skill, they become an apprentice, they gain that skill, and they do that for the next 30, 40, 50 years. But you know what? There's a great pride. I can go to the beer gardens and talk to these people. There's a great sense of pride in having those kind of capabilities. And they are really bringing, if you will, they're bringing that sense of spirit and that sense of faith. Not a religious faith per se, but a sense of belief and trust and the sense of well-being. Because without work, you can get all the unemployment compensation you want, but that will never replace the role of work, of feeling like you're making a difference through your work. And so I think we need to restore that pride, and there are many ways we do that. And I think that's got to be at the essence of it, of bringing that back to capitalism, of having an integrated model, if you will, a stakeholder model, a constituency model, where the role of business is to satisfy the needs of all those constituents. And if you do that well, you will create great wealth for your shareholders, as we did at Medtronic, creating $60 billion in market capitalization. Not because we focused on that, but because we fulfilled our mission and employees are highly motivated. So I ask you, where does your faith fit in what is your passion? And have you found the real purpose of your work and your leadership? And I do believe that each of us is a leader. Each of us is called to lead. Even people with no direct reports have a calling to lead. And I think we cannot lose sight of the importance of this calling to lead, each in our own way, using the gifts we have to help other people and to set an example through our leadership for others to follow, to be that beacon of light. I think it's in those relationships that we create if you will, the spiritual relationship is where we create the real depth of authentic relationships which are sustainable over time. They're not the Facebook relationships, although I believe in Facebook, I believe in Twitter, but that's not where you create real relationships. You create them through the intimacy of personal relationship where we share our journeys and share our stories, and we're there to help each other. So I believe we're each called to lead, each in our own way. So the last thing I'd like to ask you is, how are you making a difference in the world? So let's just do a little exercise. You're 97 years old, and you're on your deathbed. You got about 3 hours to live. So the good news is you live to 97. The bad news, you don't have long to live. And your adult children have all come in and gathered around you, and all your grandchildren are there. And your favorite granddaughter, I'm thinking of my granddaughter Dylan, who's 4.5 and lives in Munich, looks up at you and says, Grandpa or Grandma, what did you do to make a difference in the world? What are you going to tell her? I hope you won't tell her you made so much money that she never has to work a day in her life like you did. But I hope you'll tell her what's really important in life, because the time to think about that is now. You know, each of us has this calling. Robert F. Kennedy said in his lifetime, you know, few will have the greatness to bend history itself. Maybe there's some of you out there that will. I know I won't. But he went on to say, but each of us can commit ourselves to a series of actions and make this world a better place. And the sum total of all those actions will write the history of your generation. Margaret Mead once said, never doubt the power of a small group of people to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. But we can be part of that small group, those small groups that are really making a difference in the world. And I think the answer today is not at the political level. It's not going to Washington. It's getting to the heart of what can each of us do in our own sphere to make a difference. And in coming together, uniting around that sense of a central cause of really making a difference. Because at the end of the day, when you leave this earth, my way of thinking is the only thing you can take with you is what you leave behind. And I want to encourage you to think long and hard about, as part of your faith journey, what are you going to leave behind? Thank you very much. John? Thank you.
Well, I'm sure I speak for all of us in expressing our gratitude for what was both a very moving and in many ways a very courageous address. It's rare that persons of your reputation speak so directly from the heart, and I think we all deeply appreciate that. I want to make just a couple of remarks and then ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. There's a microphone here to my left on the right side. Once we've finished our conversation, if you just line up there, we'll acknowledge you one by one. You talked a good bit about the separation that we experience in our culture and often in our own lives. One of the most remarkable things that I found about your remarks is that there was something interestingly countercultural, both in the religious and in the business side. It's so rare that business leaders will speak so directly and so powerfully about their faith as you did. But it's also so rare that people of faith speak about their faith in a way that doesn't close down or build barriers, but opens up, invites in, creates a conversation that's inclusive rather than exclusive. So both of those qualities, it strikes me, were on display tonight in a way that I found exceedingly helpful. But let me ask about the other side of this, those who resisted. You made a reference at the very beginning, the fact that we live in a world that is in, at least in its own self-description, at least by a certain set of opinion leaders, secular. So that especially among elites, this sort of thing is resisted. You talked a little bit when we were having a conversation before about economists who think it's bull, soft, unquantifiable. So talk about how, as a person who's lived in precisely that kind of secular world, how you have made some headway and what you take to be some of the main barriers to making this a reality, both in our own lives, but also in wherever we are asked to function as leaders.
Well, I can't say I'm making any headway with the neoclassical economists because I would not qualify as part of their club. But even my colleague Michael Porter, his outstanding thinking and really deep thinking about these questions, he and I have been dialoguing. I teach with him and our Dean Nitin Noria and Jay Lorsch in the CEO program for new CEOs, and we spend a lot of time dialoguing about and dialoguing with all the new CEOs coming through. And these are large company CEOs and have a big impact. Even his ideas have been largely rejected. The encouraging thing I see is that there is a new generation of business leaders today that are very committed to this idea of using the corporation as an entity to make a difference and creating value for society through the work they do with their customers, not through corporate social responsibility, not through their foundation. Yes, they do this. Yes, it's a good thing, but that alone is not sufficient. Through the mainstream work of their company. And they're able to think that through and redefine it so they inflame the passions and spirits of all their employees. And that's what creates great results for your customer. You can be like a large drug company. I'm thinking of Pfizer, which spent $70 billion in a decade in research. It didn't turn out any new drugs. They bought some, but they didn't turn out because there's no correlation between innovation and dollars spent. It really has to do with the passion. Do you feel a passion? I'm going to find a solution to this problem no matter what it takes. I'll keep working on epilepsy, and or Alzheimer's, I'll do that. I'm so dedicated. And how do you inflame those passions? Because I think that's what we've lost. Even at Target stores, where I was on the board for 12 years, 350,000 employees, that's what held the company together during the difficult recession times or when they're losing share to Walmart. That kept them together. I talked to the CEO and he said, that's what kept them together, is the sense of what our purpose was, of what we were providing people. So I think we're making real progress among business leaders, but also among the new generations who are largely rejecting a lot of the false premises of my generation. So when I see I work a lot with if you call them Gen Xers, people in their 30s, the millennials, people in their 20s. There is a real passion to do something and really make a difference. So people that tell you some of these people are slackers, they're wrong. This is going to be a great generation, and I think it's time we need to open the door for them to take on many more leadership roles in our organizations, because I think they will provide the transformation. The idea of a hierarchy, which I didn't go into today, has failed. Hierarchies today, it may have worked in the 20th century, will not work today. So hierarchy organizations are largely failing now, and organizations have gone much more to a collaborative model like IBM and a networked model, if you will, that looks more like the internet than it does the military organization in the 1940s. So I think we're making great headway there. The media is not there, right. Okay, nor the Nobel Prize winning economists, but I think among those who are really, if you will, leading the people, there's great progress being made.
One of the most interesting things you said in talking about what happened at Medtronic is that the notion of a value-driven company somehow managed to move across barriers of language, of geography, of numbers. I can remember many years ago, 20-some years ago, when we were first starting this kind of work at Harvard, and Tom Chappell, who was then a Divinity School grad, founded Tom's of Maine, made a presentation to a group of business leaders, and there was a lot of skepticism in the room. They said, oh, sure, that's easy. It's a small company. At that time, it was privately held. He hadn't sold it yet at that point. And it was difficult to know how to generate the kind of example that you gave, that even in a company with 40,000 employees, there is somehow the feeling or the sense that there's a one-to-one connection with the leaders. So say a little bit more about, as the company grew, how you kept that personal touch alive, and how many people did you have to delegate that responsibility to when it became, an international company?
Well, I think the CEO has an obligation to be out there engaged with the people all the time. We used to call it pejorative, we call it micromanaging. I actually don't look at it that way at all. I think the great CEOs are very engaged with their people all the time. I didn't know anything about medicine, and to learn medicine, when I went to Medtronic, I gowned up and saw between 700 and 1,000 procedures in the 13 years I was there. Wow. Spent a lot of time wandering around the labs. I wasn't inventing anything, okay? Wandering around the factories, talking to the people doing the work. Not to the quality inspectors, but talking about the people producing the products, about the quality of the product. And that's where you see that real passion. That's why I think we need to get rid of hierarchies and get to much more putting the emphasis on the people actually doing the work. They're carrying the load. And again, I'm very encouraged that just as recently as last week and in Davos, that these ideas are being widely embraced by a lot of leaders of far larger organizations than I ever ran, that they see. Paul Pullman of Unilever, 200,000 employees. Everything is going to leading by values.
Are there good cases being developed that will help to the teaching of this in other institutions?
Yes, and John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, I had dinner with him at his home a month or two ago, and he's very much doing that at Whole Foods. Have a real passion on wellness, not as a sidelight, but that the food of Whole Foods is going to help this country become healthier. It was an Amway. Amway in their network, if you will, is 9 million people, largest organization in the world. They're restoring people they're providing people the opportunity for economic self-sufficiency. You've never had it in places like Bangladesh, Indonesia, all over the world, and they're providing those opportunities for people. Okay, they're never going to be rich, but they're providing those opportunities, and they have a huge passion for that mission. And I think that's what unites us. We don't unite around making $1.93 this year. That may unite the people on top, but that's not going to. We do need the metrics. I believe you get what you measure, but that's not where the passion, that goes the extra mile, and you won't sustain it. So the question I've been wrestling with since I joined the Harvard Business School faculty in 2004 was, how do we sustain success? Short-term success is not interesting to me. Sustainable success is what it's all about. Decade after decade. And the most negative example I can give is Hewlett-Packard, which was my role model of a company for 30 years. I thought Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett knew how to run a company. tried to get Honeywell to do that. I certainly did at Medtronic and learned from their ideas. And to see that company be destroyed literally in front of your eyes because they lost that sense of who they were.
Work is love made visible. That's a great quotation. And it resonates with me as a Lutheran because Luther's notion of vocation is the sanctification of the everyday and of the workplace.
Right.
So there's a deep connection there, and a very interesting one in very different kind of cultural contexts. There's been so much literature generated in the last 50 years about the kinds of work that seem, even as we go beyond the assembly line, the kinds of work that seem so humdrum, so spirit lagging, spirit defying. Those forms of work, which some much have, I mean, you were making instruments at Medtronic. There have to be some people who are doing that kind of hands-on work. I mean, it's against the grain of the literature, which says, oh, doing that kind of work can never be an act of spirit. It's always an act of drudgery. So there's something in the details there, both God and the devil are in the details, something fascinating to me about those details, about what's happening to that worker who's working with his or her hands to create something, who yet has a sense of the larger whole. I mean, it's really quite remarkable.
I remember visiting a Medtronic facility in Southern California that made heart valves. And they took a pig's heart and actually carved out the valve from the pig's heart. About 1 out of every 10 pig's hearts produced a valve which could be made into a replacement for the human aortic or mitral valve. I remember talking to the top work in the facility because they were heavily backlogged. It took 18 months to train people to get them fully up to speed. It was admittedly more of an art than a science. They're trying to make it into a science. And so I asked her how she did her work. She wouldn't look at me. She looked at me, but she wouldn't look down at her bench. She had all her tools laid out. She said, Mr. George, let me tell you something. My job is to make heart valves that save someone's life. And I have a big quality manual. My criteria is this valve good enough for my mother or my daughter, okay, or my husband. And if it's not, it doesn't get by me because I have to sign my name to every valve. I make 1,000 valves a year. And if one of those valves is defective, someone's going to die. Now, to you at Medtronic, 99.9% quality is considered awfully good. But I could never live with that. But you know what I think about when I go home at night? I'm thinking about the 5,000 people who are alive and restored today because of the heart valves I made. Now, isn't that what you want every employee to feel, think, have that passion? But it isn't just about saving lives. You know, it's those Target store employees. It's people on American Express that have a passion for helping create wealth for people through their private wealth management. You know, that's what it really comes down to, is we each have a role. A venture capitalist who gives someone funding they couldn't otherwise get to get them started, a social entrepreneur. All of these, I think in every case, you can unite people around that sense of passion and meaning.
Thanks, Bill. Well, you've had an invitation from our speaker to reflect either on your own journey or to ask questions. So we have about 30 minutes to which to do that. So as you would like, please line up by the microphone and let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you.
I was going to say, that would have been a first.
The first question, the icebreaker.
Always the hardest, yeah.
Always gets an award.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I have a couple of questions. One is, I'm also an Episcopalian, so I'm going to ask you a bishop question. How much like a CEO should a bishop be? And how much like a bishop should a CEO be? That's my first question. I have another question about the...
Go ahead and ask it, and he'll answer both.
Okay.
Then.
Medtronic sounds like a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful place for a person to kind of sink their life into a job that really seems like you're doing real good for people. We've just come through, or we're coming through this kind of terrible time that we kind of got here largely because of predatory practices around housing, banking and housing. Mm-hmm. Could a person working in real estate or banking, I mean, how would they incorporate, how would they take like a Medtronic's type mindset into their work?
Great questions.
I'm going to answer the second one because I feel so passionately about that. I think they incorporate that into their work because, banking actually provides the capability. We used to barter. Now we can go to the bank and deposit our money, get a fair return. We can get the bank to fund the startup of our company, to fund our expansion. Banking has an essential role in our society. The last thing we want to do is scare all the bankers away. And that's largely, in many ways, happened because they're, in many ways, afraid to lend to small business and afraid to give money to startup businesses. And I think that is a very serious economic problem and a human problem right now in the United States. So I think they have that essential role. And I think you should never lose sight of it. It's not just making money for yourself, okay? As Earl Bakken used to say to me, it's not just about making money for yourself or the company. It's about restoring people to full life and health. It's about giving people what banking can do for people, because without banking, society shuts down today, because we're going to the markets and bartering. And so we need that essential element. Now, I'm not sure, having never been a bishop or a person of the cloth, I should turn that one over to Ron. But I do think that in whether you're talking a religious organization, an educational institution, a healthcare organization, a banking organization, that the same premises apply. That our job is to inspire people and to align them around a central mission and values of the organization, and to inspire them to step up and lead at all levels. I don't understand exclusion, and so in religious terms, I'm personally totally turned off with anyone who wants to draw lines and said, if you don't pass these criteria, you can't come through the door. It's a big tent. That's everything I do, everything in my faith, everything in my belief system says it's a very big tent. We want to welcome everyone into the tent. The idea that we're going to draw lines and exclude people is beyond me. And I think we connect across, if you will, different faith lines, because there is still this central question, these existential questions about central purpose and meaning. And the idea that only certain people go to heaven and others don't make it, I just can't understand that notion. I think and so I believe that bishop has that obligation to create that big tent, if you will, in an organization, and have people in the organization passionate carry it out. The same thing is true in a corporation. How could a corporation today or any day not provide the same opportunities to women as to men, exclude gay people from prominent roles, okay, up to and including CEO, to look to a dominant nationality and everyone else is a subordinate, In today's world, that cannot work. You cannot create a global organization unless you have a true meritocracy where opportunities are equally available to everyone. You still have to perform, you get rewarded, and you can seek your own level, but any other way of looking at it is beyond my comprehension. So in that sense, the two jobs have some similarity.
As we wait for some other people to come up, or there's someone coming, I just want to point out what may be obvious, but is in my experience so incredibly rare. All of us tend to think about life of work and life of the spirit as two spheres that maybe we can grudgingly bring together. That's the way the public persona is, that's the way many of us think. Bill is talking about the way the spirit is within the life of work. Right. And that's just a way of thinking that's rare, but it seems to me needs to be encouraged. Mm-hmm. And everything you say hits that theme again and again. I think is really quite remarkable.
And I'm even going to the other extreme.
Right.
If it's not there,
right,
you will not sustain effectiveness.
Right.
You will eventually go out of business because you'll wither and die. Without passion and people in the organization, without that glue of aligning people around mission and values, and them being empowered to step up and lead, you cannot, in today's society, you cannot sustain success. Size, brand name, global reach, none of those things ensure success because you'll rot from within. And I mentioned an organization that was near and dear to my heart at one time that happened to. I hope it'll come back now, but it's had huge setbacks. I could name lots of others, but I won't go into that.
Please.
I'm glad to see this dialogue taking place between the business school and the divinity school. I'm a congregational minister. I came down from New Hampshire for this event, and I got an MBA before I got my MDiv. And one critique I'll get from members of my congregation sometimes is that they'd like me to be less of an MBA and more of an MDiv until we get into discussions about money and resources, and then all of a sudden I often feel like I'm the least MBA in the room. And this conversation about introducing our spiritual lives into our work lives is one that actually needs to go into our spiritual lives. Mm-hmm. And I found that the values and judgments and just the heuristics of our whole business-dominated culture have infected our faith communities. Mm-hmm. And so I have to have regular conversations about metrics. And people are happy there's growth in the church, and that's what they're focused on. There are more people in the pews. But when I start talking about transformation at a spiritual level, people start glazing over. It's like when you started talking in those messages about your quarterly growth results. And I'm just wondering if there's any thought or plans at the Divinity School and the Business School to have some of these maybe some of this leadership training for the MDivs so they can learn how to talk about this with their congregations and people, because I think it's great that you're doing it with the CEOs, but equipping the people who might be shepherding or pastoring those CEOs or the people who work for them to have the conversations so people can learn how to integrate these things, I think would be very, very valuable and powerful, because we learn a lot of great things in the Divinity School, but this isn't one of the things that's really required or even lifted up as an opportunity. So that's a commentary/question.
Well, excellent. I certainly like the approach you're taking, and I respect your background, admire it, in fact. But I think this integration, you've said all the right things. It's that integration that counts, because without it, you won't achieve. It's like integrating your mind, body, and your spiritual side. Until you do that, you will not be a fully alive human being, and you will not achieve the kind of capability and potential that you have to make a difference until you can do those things. Now, there's no magic time you get there. I'm not talking about born-again experience, I'm not talking about any of these things. It's a journey. And as you see in my own case, you go forward, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. You have setbacks. And so you have to be willing to subject yourself to that and take the setbacks. That's why I wrote the book True North. So how do you stay true to that? And the problem is that we know what our true north is. We know what our basic values, beliefs, and principles are, okay? But we deviate from that because we're listening instead of to our inner lights, as Steve Jobs said, we're listening to the external sirens of money, fame, power, and glory, the external gratification, the instant gratification that's become a primary role, primary tenet, particularly of this society, and certainly of our media. And so we lose sight of why we're here and what we're doing, and we don't connect with people about that all the time. And I think in all of our communities, we need to come together around that, because that's really, to me, what it's all about. And because that's the human connection. Without that, we're just all alone in the world, and it doesn't feel very fulfilling.
A brief word on the institutional question. I've been at Harvard 26 years and have been working on these sorts of relationships during that entire time. It's been very difficult, but there's a new day at the business school, not only with Bill George being there, but Nitin Noria is the new dean, is very much open to these opportunities. So I think the next decade is going to see some very interesting things that were inconceivable 20 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening. I really enjoyed hearing about your personal story. I found it really, it makes me also feel like I have a closer connection with you, even though this is the first time that I'm meeting you. Hearing your personal story, and I found it very interesting. And while I was sitting down, I did a lot of reflection about my own path. And I used to work in corporate America, and now I work for the United Nations. But what I really would like for you to talk on, which I think might be something that I was struggling with, sort of balancing in my mind sitting down, and I'm going to guess that people in the room were doing the same thing, is I agree with you that companies need to be passionate about what they do, and companies need to think about how they have greater impact beyond what they're doing. But how do they really balance this? And maybe how do you counsel, and what conversations have you had with CEOs when at the back of all of it, they're really trying to weigh shareholder value? And I know you just touched on it briefly, but if their business is really, they're in the financial services industry, or they're whatever it is, they're like a Walmart, and they're selling a product, and they're really just about driving results in people's pockets for shareholders. How can people that are at the top and the senior leadership really try to change the thinking without having a leader like yourself at the helm, so that you can push the company and encourage the organization to do things and not feel like they're not meeting their obligations with their shareholders?
Thank you. Back in 2001, I was asked by the Academy of Management, I got an award from the Academy of Management, and was asked to make a presentation. And I chose to talk about, if we have flawed theories, we can all be led astray. And we had flawed theories about shareholder value, that's the goal in itself. It's not the goal, okay? It is not the goal. And it's the integration of all the creating value for all your constituents that is the essence. And if you do that well, it's like a mathematical equation. Value to customers, inspired employees, value to employees, value to your communities, value to your constituents because you follow the rules of the FDA or whatever regulatory bodies are, equals sustainable increase in shareholder value. But if you turn that equation around, you say, how are we going to maximize shareholder value? You will actually destroy the enterprise. So the gentleman before that talked about metrics. Actually, we had a cliche at Medtronic. You get what you measure, so be careful what you measure. If you measure the wrong things, we've been measuring the wrong thing. I remember I was at a conference back when my first book, Authentic Leadership, came out in 2003 with Myron Scholes, the famous Black-Scholes Nobel Prize-winning economist. And I said, the value of an entity is not reflected in its instant stock price. He got so mad he threw his pen down and was ready to walk out of the room. But it is not. There's an essence of an organization, and you can lose it. Kodak was a great organization that lost it. It's a tragedy. So you have to continually renew it. Just like the human being needs to be renewed, just like all of us need time to go off and renew ourselves, you need to renew organizations. And that's the essence that we have to keep. So we need to measure the right metrics. How many people are we restoring? Medtronic got to the point we used to restore one person every 90 seconds. Today it's one every 3 seconds. So that's a metric everyone talks about. You realize in the last minute, 20 people have been restored around the world? That excites people. So in the lunchroom, I don't want to talk about how many people are going to get laid off tomorrow. I'm talking about how can we do it how can we help even more people? What can we do? And I think that's how you create lasting value. And that's what that paper was on, creating lasting value. I think short-term value, like WorldCom created $160 billion, then it went poof, is worthless, And I think, I think it is sustainable. I think Schumpeter's creative destruction, we can destroy ourselves and recreate ourselves, reinvent ourselves, as we tried to do it in Medtronic, and sustain it for a very long time.
Hi, I'm Kirti Vaswani. I went to the Divinity School, class of '97, where I studied Hinduism and Sanskrit. In Hinduism, we have a concept, dharma, which is to do the right thing. And the belief is that in each human being, whether you believe in a higher power or not, we have a conscience which tells everybody what is the right path or not, what's the right step to take in every situation, the right decision to make. Now, my question is somewhat cynical. I mean, I think sometimes talk is cheap. We can say all of these things, but at the end of the day, most corporations in the United States operate out of a very selfish motive, which is to make profit. And when faced a choice to make the right decision, to do the right thing, or to make money, the choice would be obvious in most cases. And my question is that in business schools, are we teaching leaders to actually do the right thing, even if sometimes it would mean to take a loss? Because often we see in business, contracts, et cetera, we are focused on the the letter of the contract, not the spirit of the contract. I mean, and this can go on into many different areas of business. So that's my question.
The answer is absolutely we're teaching that. And not every class teaches it, but absolutely we're teaching that. But I can tell you, people that strictly focus on making money will destroy the very value they're creating. They won't be fraudulent like Bernie Madoff, okay? But they will destroy the value of what they created. And I believe that I was never founded my own company, so I was a hired hand. And the job of any leader is to leave the organization healthier and better when you leave it than when you came in. And so you've got to have those sustainable elements in there that come through people. And it comes through genuine value for all your constituents. And today, I tell you, if you cut corners, there's a huge price to pay. You know, it can be in regulatory actions. It can be in, it can be in liability suits. It can be in loss of what was a great entity and going out of business because you couldn't go from being a wet film process to being, there are more pictures taken today than ever before, but no one's creating new models to do that. And I think that's what we need to recapture that. So I really believe if you don't do these things, you're in trouble. And by the way, the important thing is that the new CEOs in the last few years get this because they saw what happened to my generation of CEOs and how they destroyed so much value. Look at what Ann Mulcahy and Ursula Burns have done at Xerox after great value destruction for 13 consecutive years. Look how they brought it back. This is happening. Look at what Alan Mulally has done at Ford, taking a company that was moribund and losing everything, employment, and having the courage to totally transform that company to a great American car company. And they're producing high quality cars. And he knew he had to get to the workers on the floor, shop floor, about quality. And he transformed the UAW relationships in 2007 with Ron Gettelfinger and Bob King. And I heard this story from Bob King, the president of the UAW, which I always was a nemesis of mine for many years growing up in Michigan. I tell you, that kind of leadership can restore organizations to full health. And so I'm very excited about what's going on in so many different industries. The consumer industries. I was with 41 CEOs. I ran a seminar for 4 hours of the largest consumer companies in the world. These are retailers like Walmart, Marks & Spencer, producers like Unilever, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. I tell you, their passion today, you know what's around? Water. Water is a limited resource, and they're very, very concerned about it. Sustainable consumption, a new vision for agriculture, sustaining it, wellness. I mean, these are, some people consider these soft issues. They consider them hard issues. They're really tough, and it's by addressing those issues that they sustain their own enterprises. And by the way, they engage their employees at a deeper level, and they attract the very best people. General Mills in our town, Ken Powell attracts the best people to General Mills because they have such a sense. They now have 300 gluten-free products. This is a company that makes Wheaties. They started making Wheaties. They still make Wheaties. They're still the leader in that field, but they've really broadened how they think about things. And I'm so encouraged. A lot of people are emulating the Whole Foods model now on the food side. So I think it's going the right way. We need to get more support from Wall Street, if you want to call it pejoratively, to do that.
Please. Well, the question does remind us that what you talked about is the erosion of trust also has created deep and widespread cynicism as well. And that's something to be fought against also.
In workforces.
Right, exactly.
How effective can your organization be if everyone who works there is cynical, or 70% of the people are cynical? They don't trust you. They don't believe in the leadership, And we have brought that on ourselves. We leaders have brought them. There's only one hope for this, is we've got to have a new generation of leaders, and that's what I see emerging now. And let's look at the Gen Xers and the millennials too, and not say, oh, they're so different. Let's look at the kind of leadership they're bringing. It's stunning. Facebook's going to announce their IPO tomorrow. You could say, it's just a trivial little thing. Well, they're going to create something like $70, $80 billion of value from a college dorm room, okay? But that story has replicated itself many, many times over in other fields as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's really good to hear someone talking about this leadership crisis because, as you mentioned, it's corporations, it's in the churches, it's in the political system as well. So I'm kind of wondering if we are anticipating that if we can change the attitude from the business world, that maybe it will affect the attitudes that we have in our public policy and among our politicians? Or is this a conversation that we may need to invite the School of Government in as well? Because right now, this leadership deficit that we're experiencing, this crisis that we're experiencing, clearly is very present in our political system as well as in our other side. Just ask that you make some comments on that.
I worry about this a lot. I worry about the quality and caliber of people going into politics. We have a George Leadership Fellows that are joint students of the Harvard Divinity School and the Harvard Business School that we've funded for 6-7 years now, and very excited about these people. But they're perfectly trained to go into politics, and none of them are going, okay? Some of them are going into government, but they're not going into politics. And I think we have a real big problem there. I think we've turned off people by the process. But politics, public policy is nothing more than a reflection in a democracy of what the people want, and we need to show them and then work together to reunite society. Society is split today, and we need to reunite society around new premises, new ideas, new models. That's the whole thesis coming out of Davos, that the old models aren't working. The old theories, the flawed have been shown to be flawed, and so you can't go back there by still practicing those theories. I think there has to be fundamental root cause changes, that we look at things differently in all walks of life, and we restore the trust that's gone, because a society without trust, will sink deep into the mire.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor George. It's great to be here and see you. My question is that trust takes so long to build, and we've addressed that there's such little trust. I'd like you to connect accountability with perhaps comments on the benefit of cross-discipline and cross-sector collaboration across business, government, nonprofits, educational institutions to serve the values that you represent so clearly.
Thank you. I should comment, Diana Meyer worked as a leader on a research team for True North and interviewed more people than anyone else, and brought in some fantastic interviews, if you will, that led to the basic underpinning, in depth of the book by the excellence of her interviews. We've lost sense of accountability. We are accountable for our actions, not just to our maker, but to ourselves and to everyone we're with. And you cannot have a society that operates without accountability, without a deep sense of responsibility. And without that, the society will continue to unravel. So accountability must be there. Now, you spoke to the idea of cross-sector collaboration. The tough problems today, contrary to public opinion, are not going to be solved by any one person. Even, some of the articles I read lately, it's just wrong. They're so tough that you need a collaboration across disciplines and people coming together that see things from different perspectives and solve really hard problems. Think about the problem of AIDS in Africa. 15 years ago, everyone was beating up at the drug companies, give us drugs for free. That was only one piece of the action. Someone had to deliver those drugs. Somebody had to upgrade the medical communities, healthcare communities in those countries. Somebody had to deal with the cultural side. Somebody had to work with the government. And that was a coalition, a collaboration. So the tough problems of society, whether they're global peace, energy, the environment, education, job creation, innovation, or healthcare, can only be solved today by collaborating across, if you will, economic lines, functional lines, intellectual lines, geographic lines, certainly. And you're going to see this becoming, that's where all the solutions are going to come from, this form of collaboration. Back to my example of Sam Palmisano, because he's a pioneer in this field. He started in 2003, he wrote a paper in Foreign Affairs called The Integrated Global Enterprise that has become the model. I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review 2 weeks ago on this subject. Become the model for the modern global organization, because he realized that he had to eliminate the hierarchy, get rid of the silos, not focused on rules and processes, but focused on collaboration for his company to be successful. And I think you can see the stunning success of IBM right to this very moment with a new CEO, Ginny Rometty, is a result of that decision taken some 8-9 years ago.
I think we have one more question.
If I may. Thank you. You talked about value-driven companies.
Right.
And then just a few minutes ago, you used the term genuine values. And it would be interesting to hear how you would define what is a higher value or a better value. What is genuine versus just any value is not as inspiring.
Thank you for the question. I was not referring to higher values because I think I do not judge values through a hierarchy or people through the values they have. I think the key question is the fidelity to one's values. I would never tell anyone in the classroom what values you have. I remember a student asking me when I was teaching in Switzerland, "Professor, are you going to teach us values?" And I said, "No, I can't teach you values. I hope we can create an environment here in which we can exchange ideas. And as a result of that, your values will be solidified into what you really believe. And you will have fidelity to those values." See, the problem is that the problems we've created are not because people didn't have, there are some that don't have any values. But that's not the core problem. The core problem is people go off and they lose sight of their values and they stop practicing them. And as Steve Jobs said in his famous Stanford commencement address from 2005, they get caught up in the external gratification. As he said, never let the opinions of others shut down your inner voice. And you have to hear your own inner voice. And that's your sense of right and wrong, of conscious, of what is the right thing. And it's that sense of value. And so what's genuine to you is what's real to you, not what's, these are genuine and these are not. And I think it's coming together by sharing values that we build a much greater society, we build great organization, even though people come at it from different perspectives. And I think the remarkable thing now in global organizations that by national origin are extraordinarily diverse. The only glue connecting, okay? People who've been with the company for 30 days and raised in what used to be known as the People's Republic of China, okay? And Americans and South Africans is that sense of values. That's the only place we can connect and come together because our life experiences are so different. It's across those lines that brings us together.
This has been a remarkable evening. Thank you for all of you for taking the time, and our gratitude especially to Bill George for presenting so wonderfully. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
Well
the
done.
opportunity.
Well done.
And leading this dialogue.
Absolutely well done.
Thank you very much.